One of the ongoing projects in my shop is building a car from scratch. So it's a Lotus 7. So it's a British racing car. Basically, it's pretty simple construction. You build it out of 3/4 square tube. So last fall I ordered a bunch of 3/4 square tube and I got about half of it cut, but you can see the rest of it laying here on the floor. So one of today's projects is going to be cutting up the rest of the sections of tube. Here I've got pieces of this frame already cut up to length. There's a bunch of different plans online for different chassis you can build. One of the bigger chassis because I don't want it to be a tiny little car. So then what I did is I made a cut list, and then the other thing that I really like is having an iPad, so I can pull up the blueprint right on the iPad and I can cut. The way this frame builds is it's square tube and there's some compound miter cuts on the square tube, so it's really hard to it's not just square lengths you're cutting, so you have to have a blueprint with you while you're cutting. So basically I just have my list and I've got the blueprint and I'm gonna start cutting up tube today. I have 3 more sections of 20-foot tube that need cut. So this has been pretty useful. This is just a portaband stand that I made out of some pieces of MDF and a sheet of plywood. I routed a pocket in the back, so basically the table that comes on this fits into that pocket, and this sandwich is on there, and then it just gets held together with a couple screws. It's not super easy to take apart, but it only takes about a minute or 2 to take it apart, so it's nice to have when you're doing little work and you want a bigger table, because this basically has no table at all. For a basic idea on how I cut these parts and the recommended way to cut these, because they're not all square ends, they have mitered corners. You need to have a combination or a, I don't know, it's like a machinist square or something, but it's got a protractor on there or whatever, so you can pick the angle you want to use. This happens to be a Starrett brand that my mother found me in a yard sale, so it's pretty nice. But what you need is one of those, a regular square, and a tape measure is what I'm using. The blueprints are in both metric and standard dimensions, so I'm just going off the standards. So this particular part needs to be 20 inches, 200, so 20.2. But the way it's dimensioned from longest end to longest end. So you have to take that dimension and use the square to find where that end's gonna be. And then I'm using a little scratch awl to mark the end of that. And then once you have that mark, you can dial in your angle on this. And then you can put in the cut line. So one of the things that I did that, we'll see how it turns out, is the recommendation for the drawing is that this 1x1 is supposed to be 16 gauge cold finish square tube. Well, where I live, that type of material is expensive. The steel supplier that's right down the road from me doesn't deal in cold finish steel very much. So I got 14 gauge, what they call hot finish. So it needs to be sanded and it's thicker, but one of the things that I was considering was it's going to make the welding a lot easier. When you're talking thin material like that, even one gauge size makes a huge difference in welding. So if these angles aren't 100%, the tube will be thick enough for me to go in and essentially build up the tube before I weld it if I have to. But I think the dimensions are going to be close enough, and the way it's going to fit together is going to be close enough. The other thing I'm doing is I'm leaving them a hair long. That way I can set up a belt sander and square these off really clean, and then hopefully everything will fit. Plus, when you lay these in, you know, if you're an 1/8 inch short and you cheat it to either side, that's only a 1/16, and a 1/16 gap for a weld is not very much. That'll easily be able to get filled with this. So I just got a bunch more of these to do. Then yeah, so once you have the angle, use the right angle square to trace that line all the way around, because what you do is you don't set your saw up and take one cut. You actually go and you, at least the way I'm doing it, and this seems to be best method for using a portaband saw like I have, is you cut each angle. You cut this side, then you turn it, you cut that side, cut that side, and you cut that side. Your corners aren't gonna, you know, line up perfectly like they would if you took one cut, but what seems to happen, I tried a couple with one cut, and even being extremely careful with your saw and trying to cut perfectly straight, it just doesn't come out. Overall, it doesn't come out as well as taking 4 different cuts. So take 4 cuts, clean up the ends with a sander afterwards, and the parts will fit perfectly fine. this is a restoration project that I picked up about 2 or 3 years ago. It's an old cast iron cook stove.